Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. There's a famous saying that you never change a winning formula. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why mess with something that's working well for you? Well, tell that to this man right here. This is New York Giants defensive coordinator Bill Belichick. You may have heard of him before. Before he became arguably the greatest coach in the history of the sport, before he won close to 300 games in his NFL career, before he led his team to 9 Super Bowls, and before he won 6 Vince Lombardi trophies, he was the defensive coordinator under Bill Parcells in New York. And when many people think of his time with the Giants, they think of his game plan at Super Bowl XXV. It was a heck of a game plan, and was so important to the history of the sport that it is currently on display at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Some argue that it is the greatest defensive game plan of all time. But what you might not realize is that it might not even be the best game plan he had in that postseason. Prior to the 1990 Divisional round against the Chicago Bears, Belichick implemented a defense so radical and decided that he was going to completely change how the Giants did things. And the result was nothing short of masterful. And this is the story behind the greatest bit of coaching in the history of the Divisional round. Before I talk about the game plan in question, we need some context to understand just how good the Giants were and how their opponent was playing, because it will help us to understand how ridiculous this game plan seemed on paper at first. In 1990, the New York Giants were a fantastic team. They finished the regular season with a 13-3 record, which was the second most wins they ever had in a season, only trailing the 1986 team that went 14-2 and won Super Bowl XXI, winning the team's first Super Bowl title in franchise history. They had a point differential of plus 124, which was the best in the NFC and was the second best total in the NFL, only behind the Buffalo Bills at plus 165. And they had what was quite easily the best defense in the league. By the time the regular season ended, the Giants had allowed just 211 points, allowing an average of just over 13 points per game. For some perspective, the 1985 Chicago Bears, widely regarded at the time as the greatest defense ever, allowed 198 points. That's how good the Giants were. That 1990 defense was in the discussion with the vaunted 85 Bears. Their defense needed to be good, because their offense was fairly pedestrian. In fact, it ranked in the bottom half of the league in points scored. When you have an offense that ranks in the bottom half in points scored, and yet you have the best point differential in the conference, that shows you just how good your defense is. And if there was any particular element of the stout defense that was incredible, it was their rush defense. Trying to run against the Giants defense most of the time was like trying to run against a brick wall. They allowed the 4th fewest rushing yards, the 6th fewest rushing touchdowns, and the 7th fewest yards per carry in the league. In each of the 3 major rushing categories on defense, they ranked in the top 25% of the league. And some of the performances in particular were astonishing. In 1990, Dallas Cowboys running back Emmitt Smith made the Pro Bowl, had close to 1,000 yards rushing, had 11 rushing touchdowns, and won Offensive Rookie of the Year. To learn more about his rookie season, click the card in the upper right corner. But against the Giants in Week 2, he had 11 yards rushing. The Cowboys as a team had 20 yards on 11 carries for an average of 1.8 yards per carry. The Indianapolis Colts had Hall of Famer Eric Dickerson on their team. When the Colts played the Giants, however, they were held to 55 rushing yards on just over 3 yards per carry. And the Buffalo Bills had Hall of Famer Thurman Thomas playing some of the best football of his career. When the Bills played the Giants in the regular season, Thomas was held to less than 3 yards per carry. And Buffalo, which had a top 10 rushing offense in every category, was held to 65 yards total on 2.7 yards per carry. Safe to say, the Giants' run defense was really good. It was downright dominant. And that was good, because their first opponent in the playoffs was none other than the Chicago Bears. In 1990, the Chicago Bears had an atrocious passing attack. Of the 28 teams in football, the Bears ranked 24th in passing touchdowns, 24th in yards per pass attempt, and 28th in passing yards. When your starting quarterback in Jim Harbaugh finishes the season with barely over 2,000 yards passing and 10 touchdown passes, that's usually a very bad sign. However, the Bears were 11-5, made the playoffs, won the NFC Central, and beat the New Orleans Saints in the wildcard round. The main reason for their success, if they couldn't do it through the air, it was because they did it on the ground. Chicago was the best running team in football, and that was their offensive identity throughout the 1990 campaign. By the time the season ended, the Bears led the league in rushing touchdowns, scoring 22 times on the ground. They ran the ball more than any other team in football, running it an astonishingly high 551 times for an average of over 34 times per game. And it worked tremendously for them. They finished the year with the 2nd most rushing yards in the league, only behind the Philadelphia Eagles, and finished with the 5th best yards per carry average in the league as well. The numbers were extremely clear throughout the wildcard round. When the Bears ran for at least 140 yards, they were 10-0. Anything less than that, and they were just 2-5. Stopping the Bears on the ground was absolutely critical if you wanted to have any chance at winning. And even if you technically stopped them, you didn't really stop them. In all 17 games that Chicago played before the Divisional, they ran for at least 100 yards in every one of them. As a side note, if you want to learn about one of those games that they played during the 1990 season, which was the regular season finale against the Kansas City Chiefs where they ran for over 100 yards, click the card in the upper right corner. They ran for over 200 yards 4 times, and were coming off of a performance against the New Orleans Saints in a 16-6 wildcard win where they racked up 189 yards on the ground. In one game against the Minnesota Vikings, Jim Harbaugh went 5 for 16 with 43 yards passing, no touchdowns, 1 interception, and a passer rating of 14.6, which is worse than if it did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. Somehow, they still won that game, because they ran for 215 yards on 5 yards a carry. Neil Anderson was a Pro Bowl running back who had over 1,000 yards rushing, and Brad Muster was arguably the best fullback in the league, averaging 4.7 yards per carry while running for 664 yards and 6 touchdowns. Chicago's rushing game was absolutely lethal, and the Giants had to stop them if they were going to advance to the NFC Championship. But New York's run defense was really good all season, so this shouldn't be a problem, right? Well, in Belichick's eyes, it wasn't good enough. When Belichick went to Chicago to scout the Bears-Saints game, thinking that there was a pretty good chance that Chicago would be New York's next opponent, he realized very quickly that New York would have to play lights down in run defense to win this one. And even though the Giants, as mentioned before, had an incredible run defense, Belichick decided that they needed to completely overhaul everything. The Giants were going to rebuild their defense from scratch, and mess with the winning formula to try and create something even better. In the week or so leading up to the game, the Giants completely switched their defense, spending all the practice on it. Instead of coming out in a 3-4 like they usually did, the Giants were going to play a 4-3. Now, the Giants occasionally played a 4-3 in passing situations, so this didn't seem like a huge adjustment at first. However, Belichick put the outside linebackers on the line of scrimmage, meaning that Lawrence Taylor and Carl Banks would play up close. That made the defense a 6-1. The Giants had never run a 6-1 all season. Changing your entire base defensive alignment in the playoffs when you're 13-3, got there on the strength of your run defense, and only have 7 practices to do so is a bold strategy. But the Giants were going to spend every single practice intensely learning the ins and the outs of the system. As defensive tackle Eric Howard, who was the nose tackle in the 3-4 and was now a right defensive tackle under this system, said on the practices, it was almost like training camp. Belichick's goals with this defense were simple. Number 1, confuse the heck out of Chicago by giving them a different look with Carl Banks and Lawrence Taylor as true outside linebackers. Number 2, counter Chicago's blocking schemes and get a ton of pressure up front. And number 3, force Chicago to actually throw the ball. Make Jim Harbaugh and arguably the worst passing offense in football beat you. And with that, we head to Giants Stadium. It's January 13th, 1991, and it's time for this highly anticipated divisional round matchup between the Bears and the Giants for a spot in the NFC Championship to face off against the San Francisco 49ers and come one game closer to a spot in Super Bowl XXV. This was going to be the debut of the overhauled 6-1 defense that the Giants practiced specifically for this game. And the end result? It worked even better than intended.
But now this has to be the surprise here. You see the 4 defensive line here, then you have a linebacker here, a linebacker here, and a safety up here. So they have 8 men up, 4-man line, the first time they'd used that all year. So the Bears could not have expected this.
The Giants absolutely dominated this game in every sense of the word. Outside of nothing to start the game off, they never trailed or tied at any point, as they had command from the opening kickoff. Matt Barr got the first points of the game on a 46-yard field goal in the first quarter to make it 3-0, and Stephen Baker scored on a 21-yard touchdown pass from Jeff Hostetler later in the quarter that made it 10-0. After Hostetler threw his second touchdown pass of the day, with this one being a 5-yard pass to Howard Cross, the Giants took a 17-3 lead into the halftime break, much to the delight of their home fans. And in the second half, they continued to pour it on, with Hostetler punching it in from 3 yards out to make it a 24-3 game in the third quarter, and with Maurice Carthen scoring from 1 yard out in the fourth quarter to make it 31-3, officially putting the nail in the coffin and sending the Giants to their second NFC Championship in franchise history. But for the purposes of our story, we don't really care how the offense did. How did the rushing defense do? Well, they did exactly what they had to do, and then some. No one, and I mean no one, saw this coming in terms of just how dominant the Giants were at stopping the run. Remember, Chicago ran for at least 100 yards in every game this season. Against the Giants, they ran for a grand total of 27 yards. That's it. The number 1 rushing offense in football was held to a mere 27 yards. They ran the ball 16 times and got stuffed virtually every time, having no answers whatsoever for the 6-1. They abandoned the running game in the second half, partly because time was not on their side, and partly because they couldn't figure out how to get past New York's front seven. It was that bad. Neil Anderson finished the 1990 season with the 6th most rushing yards in football and with some votes for Offensive Player of the Year, and was coming off of a performance against the New Orleans Saints in the wildcard round where he had 102 rushing yards. Against the Giants, he had 12 carries for 19 yards, averaging a mere 1.5 yards per carry. Brad Muster was coming off of a 71-yard game against New Orleans where he averaged roughly 6 yards per carry, and was coming off of a 1990 regular season where he finished inside the top 10 of the entire NFL in yards per carry amongst all qualified players. Against the Giants, he had 4 carries for 8 yards. And outside of one run by Neil Anderson that went for 9 yards, the Bears did not have a single run that went for more than 3 yards. Belichick's bold plan worked wonders. And after the game, all the talk was about this bit of genius.
There's Bill Belichick. He's the defensive coordinator of this team, and he's the guy that put this game plan together, and I think he did an excellent job. You know, he went to Chicago last week, watched the Bears play New Orleans, and he called his game plan against the Bears while he was sitting in Soldier Field. And he said, you know, I learned some things that could have hurt us if I would have done that. So I've changed them, and this is what he came up with.
When Belichick was asked about this radical change on the run defense, he was incredibly pleased with the performance, and understandably so. He said that the defense's job is to keep them out of the end zone, and by allowing 3 points and no touchdowns, the Giants did just that. Quite bluntly, he said, against the run, I thought we played awfully well. And Chicago Bears head coach Mike Ditka admitted that New York's game plan was brilliant, saying they forced us to a passing game. And I don't like to play that kind of a game. As a side note, if you want to learn more about Mike Ditka and his coaching career, click the card on the upper right corner. And after that divisional round win, the rest is history for Belichick and company. The Giants won in the NFC Championship against the San Francisco 49ers by a final score of 15-13, winning on a last-second field goal by Matt Barr, and then won in Super Bowl XXV by a final score of 20-19, with Belichick's iconic game plan where he intentionally allowed Thurman Thomas to run for 135 yards being a huge part in that. After that Super Bowl win, Belichick became the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, and a decade later started his dynastic run in New England, where he cemented his legacy as one of the greatest minds in the history of the sport. What Belichick implemented on this day in the 1990 divisional round against the Chicago Bears was a remarkably bold game plan that would have been torn to shreds if it backfired. On the surface, changing a winning formula that has worked for you all season doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. The Giants not only did that, and not only tried out a brand new defense that they had literally never shown before, but did it in the most important game of their season, knowing that this plan backfiring and resulting in a loss would end their season and send them packing. And yet, it worked wonders. It's just another iconic moment in the legendary career of the great Bill Belichick. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9, and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.